say, I don't know if the general public reading about these issues has a full appreciation for the nuance and the differences between how I believe parks collects park impact fees generally versus how redevelopment projects are unique in that regard. So I'm going to pretend like I know what I'm talking about with respect to how PRIF works generally for parks, and to the extent I'm wrong, feel free to correct me, or this is general. But generally, parks does their zone impact plan, improvement plan, where they identify needs for new parks. As organic development that council doesn't have to incentivize happens in the city. Think about, I live in a Lennar house, so I'll just go with Lennar. A general Lennar production home neighborhood. Like, we know some of these farms on the west side are going to turn into Lennar production home housing. It's just a natural progression of the growth of a city. So Parks identifies the needs that need to receive funding, Bear Creek, for example. As organic development happens by itself, money flows into Parks. Parks uses that money for the needs that they identified, which are largely suburban parks, destination parks, which makes total sense. Redevelopment projects, they're just slightly different. The biggest difference is that they're not organic. There's nothing natural about First on Main, for example. There's nothing natural about redevelopment projects. The only way redevelopment projects happen, and I'm speaking in general terms, is when the city incentivizes them with millions of dollars. That incentive can come in the form of TIF. That incentive can come in the form of land previously purchased by the CRC with money authorized by City Council. Sometimes it's both. Sometimes it's land and TIF and cash over and above that. I mean, our job is to present a project to council that council believes is the right project, and then we incentivize that project to happen. And so none of these projects would be organically happening ever and producing any park impact fees if the city wasn't pouring millions of dollars into them. So today, there's not $1 of park impact fees on redevelopment projects that's guaranteed to ever happen. If this council never again incentivizes a single CRC project, there is no park impact fees coming off of CRC projects. The short version of that is it's a but-for test. If the city's not pouring millions of dollars into the project, then you're not getting the park impact fees anyways. So there's a number of other items, like, I'm thinking about my house. At a certain point, I put a down payment on my house. The Lennar took that down payment, went to City Hall, pulled the construction permit, and paid that money at that time. So we kind of know when park impact fees come in, and they're there. Versus the council can approve a redevelopment project, and we need 1,000 things to happen for that redevelopment project to actually occur. So none of these funds are guaranteed. Some of these funds are a 20-year project. So without offending Benjamin and speaking as to specific projects, let's assume there's a theoretical project on 40 acres with a giant park in the middle. That project is building infrastructure, really the park's infrastructure on day one, the Central Plaza. With money, you credit against future park impact fees on buildings that won't be built for another 20 years. So it's an instance where we're getting the benefit without, versus if parks went and built infrastructure, parks would have to wait 20 years for every one of those dollars to actually roll in. And part of this is I want to get away from the rigidness and allow more flexibility for the city's economic development function. I mean, it is. I'm going to use another theoretical example, if I may. Pretend there's a new multifamily project in a corporate headquarters for a bank going up somewhere in Midtown. That project required city incentive. That project had $1.2 million of park impact fees going back into the site. over and above the TIF, and that project had an additional $500,000 of cash contribution from the CRC, the city, to make that project happen, to create the park impact fees in the first place. The developer ultimately has a pro forma, and if they don't have enough money to build the project, they won't build the project. So on a project like that, if $1.2 million of park impact fees can't be used on the site to make the project happen in the first place, and that money has to be sent to the Parks Department, that means that someone from somewhere has to come up with another $1.2 million to make that project work, to create the park impact fees in the first place. Well, as long as council is incentivizing the projects with TIF, with land, with whatever, what we're essentially doing is taking money from one project, requiring more money for the exact park impact fees that we want to send to parks. If the dollars aren't there to make the project work, then there's no parks, there's no money, and there's no project, there's no park impact fees in the first place. So at a certain point, if you need a dollar to make the project work, and that dollar has to be sent to another department, then the council will have to put in that dollar to make the project work in the first place. This is different than some Lennar neighborhood, for example. So, here's kind of how, and one of the things when you talk about is I proposed a process for how this could work in an email.
And I was not allowed to share that.
Am I okay to talk about that now?
I don't have any problem with you talking about it.
Okay. I mean, our goal here is to get developers to invest in our city. And at a certain point, once a developer has spent enough money and is far enough along, even if the deal no longer pencils out, the developer is going to put more money in to finish the project. The developers need, I'll just be frank, the developer needs to get past the political questions in order to really put funds into the project. I mean, they can draw pictures initially, but until they reach council approval, they're not going to invest more money in. So traditionally, that council approval is when the administration first brings the project to city council, says, this is the project, here's all the details about the project. Do you, council, believe that this is the right kind of project? That's when council passes bonds. That traditionally has been the big political approval. That gets the developer often close on the land, do all these other things, spend money on design, spend money on all these things to move the project forward, because all the other approvals after that stage, they're not political questions, if you will. Previously, the final park impact fee agreed. I mean, how this happens is how this happened before is once the council approves the bond deal, it's time for design. It's time to hire everybody. At a certain point, there is a document that itemizes exactly what the park impact fees are being used for. That document is generally not generated for like a year to a year and a half until after the project has been initially approved. Honestly, half the time that document is generated, right? They've hired landscape architects. They're working on plazas. They're working on pavers. That design is happening when they're started the foundations for the project, when they're locked into the project. And frankly, that is when us as a redevelopment function have the most leverage with the developer. So the process that I proposed was, when a project is first brought to council, we have a full discussion on what we expect the park impact fees to be used for. And it's different for every project. Like on some projects, we know that there's a central plaza in the project, and the park impact fees are going to go towards that plaza, because that plaza is going to cost more than what those park impact fees are. There are some cases, though, where not all of the park impact fees will get used for the site. In those cases, the hope is that they would go into what we've had before, the Urban Parks Fund. I mean, it should be our goal to get the developer building, and to the extent we can negotiate as much money to go into the Urban Parks Fund to be used for future parks, we should try to do that. we have the greatest leverage to negotiate how much exactly goes into the Urban Parks Fund and what gets applied towards the project when the developer is literally already constructing the project. That is when we have, as a city, the most negotiating power. So if I could step back, my proposal is kind of threefold. When the project is first proposed, we have an honest discussion about what the intent of park impact fees is on the project. And we take that to the Parks Board, I would have Klitzing in the conversation. On some of the projects, we would know ahead of time, look, 100% of this should be used for this central plaza that Klitzing and I are like designing together. On some of this, maybe there's an uncertainty between how much exactly is applied to the site with the goal that the rest of it goes into the Urban Parks Fund. To use any of the money from the Urban Parks Fund, I believe counts. Previously, BPW, it was all frankly, a CRC thing. I think council should have oversight of that. I think the council should decide what the money in the Urban Parks Fund goes towards with, Klitzing's recommendation. The one part that scares me the most is when a project is first introduced, goes to council, council believes it's the right thing to put a whole bunch of incentive into the project and approves the project. That's the point at which the political question has been answered. And and staff work the deal. At a certain point, it goes previously to the Board of Public Works. I think at this point, it's exactly when the Parks Board and really Klitzing, we should be working on this the whole time, should be able to make sure that what we told council initially is exactly what we're doing. And frankly, if the administration, Mayor Finkham, presents a project to council where she says, we think about 50% of park impact fees can go towards the project here and here, and hopefully about 50% will go into the Urban Parks Fund. If later on at BPW, a year and a half later, she does something totally different, that will break the trust. But what I would really hope to avoid is to have now a year and a half or whatever down the road, and then another council vote to approve an aspect, a portion of the project. Because now, developers want certainty. When they make a deal with the administration and the council, they know that the administration is going to follow through on the deal, versus council votes sometimes have I think in the view of developers, a political tinge to them. And if we're having two council votes, then a developer doesn't have certainty until the second council vote. I think if we all communicate together and this stays at the Board of Public Works, I don't believe Mayor Finkham has done anything to lose anyone's trust, and we're almost implementing a system that guards against the mayor doing something when this mayor has not done anything to lose anyone's trust just yet. I've invited a council appointee to the Redevelopment Commission, Dave Bowers here, who can also speak about how, what lenders and developers are looking for in terms of certainty. But I think it's incumbent upon, honestly, the Redevelopment Commission now, from the very beginning, to be as open as possible about what we intend to use the park impact fees for. And if it's, well, part of this we know is going to be this, and the rest we hope to put in the Urban Parks Fund, or if it's between 40 and 60% of the fees will be used for the site, the rest will go into the Urban Parks Fund. I think if we stay, true to those proposals, then council should have the trust in the mayor at BPW level a year and a half down the road, and to carry that out, because we're talking about this with each other. But then we avoid the issue of a political approval for something a year and a half down the road from the initial political approval, which I think will harm our economic development efforts. It's almost like these are safeguards if the people are not working together and aren't to be trusted. And I think there's a new administration, and there's a different tenor of these things. And then the one final point, if I could make it, is this is going back to what I said initially, where like right now parks They know they get money from various from neighborhoods as parking back fees flow in, and they've identified the source, the use of what they want the money is for. Bear Creek is right here. We've bought this land. We need infrastructure, parks infrastructure in Bear Creek. That's what we're going to use it for. The parking back fee process through redevelopment through the Urban Parks Fund allows us to be a bit more nimble, because none of us can guess which are the next 10 parcels that are going to redevelop in the core. And where it makes sense, parks infrastructure I believe should be part of the project if it truly enhances it. And where it doesn't, let's put it into the Urban Parks Fund so that the council can decide how to use those funds upon the recommendation of Mr. Klitzing. But I hope everyone sees the difference there between we know where Bear Creek is, and we know what we want the money flowing to Bear Creek for, versus we don't know where we can build the next few public plazas until we know which developments are these grand redevelopments that the city is incentivizing. And it makes it just a little tougher with micro parks in the core. We have to be a bit more nimble reacting to the development that's kind of happening as it happens.